Levi, over to you.
Thanks so much. Welcome, shalom, everybody. This is now the 8th year that mHealth Israel has been organizing educational events, and I'm embarrassed to say the very first time we've done a voice of the patient focused theme, and the response is terrific. About 300 folks are participating in this webinar, so we're very excited, and it's a testament to the people who are going to share their expertise, really spanning the health industry value chain. The format is going to be 12-minute presentations by each of our panelists, followed by a discussion that'll be moderated by Gil Bashe from Fin Partners. We will record all of the session. I'll be posting in the chat section, the presentations and other written thought leadership materials by our panelists. If you have questions, please put those into the chat section. And with that, I would love to make one more plug before we turn it over to Alan B. There will be some upcoming webinars you're all invited to join, including February 17th. Every year we do a special program with the Health Research Institute at PwC. And then again on March 2nd with Hospitals of the Future. So join us for that. Now we have the voice of the patient, and hopefully you'll ask questions. We can make this a real discussion. So we should call this voice of the patient and the voice of bearded guys, because all of the guys on this webinar have beards. Has nothing to do with COVID, I'm sure. And our first bearded guy is Alan B. Alan Balch. So take it away.
Levi, I just have to say, Levi, I'm glad you didn't say bearded people in this case. I think it would have been sort of disturbing.
Right. Instead of OGs, we're BGs. So Alan, the floor is yours, and I will stop share. Thank you.
Thank you. And then do you have the slides to put
Sure.
up?
Do you want me to share? Sure. Let's do that.
Go ahead.
Okay.
And while he's doing that, I just want to say hello to everyone, wherever you are. I know there's quite a few people from different parts of the world, so I'm not going to guess what time zone you're in, but it's great to see everyone, and I'm proud to be part of this panel, and this is such an important topic. And I have just noting the time here to make sure I don't go over, and out of respect for my colleagues as well. So I'm going to talk about the patient voice from two perspectives. One is how we think about that and organize our systems of service at Patient Advocate Foundation around that central part, but then also extrapolate that into how to think about how to really elevate and honor and incorporate the patient voice into clinical workflow, which we think is really important. So I guess at the end of the day, if you're not organizing your systems and processes around the patient and their voice and how to bring that in explicitly and consistently into your processes, then you're not doing the patient voice justice. So with that, if you can go to the next slide, I'll give you a little background about who we are very quickly. And then each one of these slides is a half an hour slide at least. I'm just going to fly right by, and hopefully some of these points will also be things my colleagues will touch on in their presentations and from their different viewpoints within the health system. And I will apologize to those of you. I know this is primarily an international audience. Our perspective and the things that we've learned about the healthcare system really come from a U.S. perspective, but I know some of the problems and issues that people face are certainly global in nature. But we are a 501c3 nonprofit operating across all 50 states, the United States. Essentially, what we provide is an emergency room for people who have access and affordability issues in the world's most complicated and expensive healthcare system. So we provide financial support. We provide what we call case management. It's sort of a form of patient navigation, if you will, and I'll go into a little more detail about that. But we do this, we provide direct patient services to about 200,000 individuals a year. And we've helped about 1.5, 1.6 million people over our 25 years our organization has been in existence. Next slide, please. And we actually serve lots of different diseases. In 2020, we served patients representing over 620 different disease areas. We have a comprehensive suite of programs that we offer. I mentioned the case management financial support. We do a lot of work in patient education empowerment. We have a research enterprise. We do a lot around patient preference research. We have a very explicit, and have for many years, a health equity and community engagement aspect of our organization. I'm not going to go through all those. They're just, we learn a lot from the patients that we serve. And so I don't have time to show you the data and the evidence that supports the things that we're going to advocate for in these slides, but just know there is an evidence, these aren't just me throwing out my opinion. This is actually what we've learned from talking to the patients that we're helping. And these are primarily low-income patients who have insurance, who are struggling with, and if you go to the next slide, you'll get a sense of what we're talking about here. And I'm going to focus on what we call precision navigation, which is our case management service. We talk a lot about precision medicine, so this is kind of a play on that concept. But for us, it's about getting the right, and we're not at all involved in medical decision-making or in the treatment side of things. We really are about helping patients deal with all the other things that are happening in life that have a direct impact on their ability to access and afford and get the health outcomes that they're seeking. So we really strive to get the right help to the right patient at the right time. It's a very open-ended service. We listen to and then document the real and immediate problems that a patient is facing, and then we figure out how to help them in ways that matter to them. It takes us on average 10 days to work with a patient and close their case, and we make about 15 to 20 contacts with the patient on their behalf to resolve their issues that they're facing. Next slide. And what we end up primarily dealing with, and I don't know if this is a uniquely American term, but we use the term social determinants of health a lot to think about the issues that we're addressing a lot for patients really have to do with economic stability, their income, their employment, their expenses, their medical bill, a lot of issues around housing and transportation, hunger, health coverage. So these are all the things that the health system isn't, when you're in the health system or in the hospital system, these are going to come up for you, but they're not necessarily the types of problems that the health system is designed or feels obligated necessarily to address. But this is the world in which we operate. Next slide. Just a quick case study. Gil asked me to make sure to maybe make it real and personal. So this was an African-American male in his 70s that was insured, had bladder cancer, needed help with unpaid medical bills. For us, that means probably some really big hospital bills that weren't paid, and was actually having trouble with utility expenses, heat, the cost of running your household. Next, so this is where I don't have time to go through the whole case, but I'll just run down sort of the set of solutions that our case manager was able to bring to this patient. The next slide. You just hit So patient was on a fixed income and couldn't pay their medical bills, so didn't have the extra money that suddenly was needed to pay for the out-of-pocket expense associated with his medical care. And then there was need for that outstanding utility bill as well. We were able to get him enrolled in Extra Help, which is our federal program for subsidized medication. And then we also were able to connect him to multiple resources for rent, for nutritional assistance, for help with his utility bill. Many of our states and localities have a program around LIHEAP, which is essentially a program to help you pay for your heating bills. We organized a series of conference calls with the patient's medical center to try to get them eligible for charity care. And as a result, he became eligible for medical care, and all his outstanding medical bills were written off. And so I can't underestimate the value of bringing that kind of relief to a patient across several different areas of financial distress for that patient. So next slide. So what we've learned, and now I'm switching over to sort of thinking about what do we mean when we talk about the patient voice, and what does that mean to us? And if you really want to build an environment or a platform that really helps to elevate that, you got to start with 3 fundamental building blocks. You have to build a system that respects the patient voice. You have to be able to listen genuinely to the patient, and you have to establish a personal connection. That doesn't mean you're best friends or buddies. It means you're acknowledging them as a person and really trying to understand what is it about them that's important to them, what matters to them. And you can't do that successfully, again, without those other aspects, the respect and the genuine listening. Next slide. So when we think about, this is our little stick man, for us, there's sort of this balance that we're trying to achieve. And oftentimes we're very focused when we think about the healthcare system, about what's the matter with the patient, which is important. Obviously, you need to get to that, and that informs, the treatment selection and the care planning. But, the patient voice is really a lot about what matters to the patient and trying to make sure that you're incorporating that into the aspect of what's the matter with them, because the two are inextricably linked. And this is one of those slides that we could go on and on, but in the interest of time, I'll go to the next one, because these concepts kind of build upon each other. But if you're focused on figuring out what matters to the patient, that for us starts to get at how you build what we call a person-centered healthcare system. You might also call it a patient-centered healthcare system, but these are sort of the three legs of that stool that we think of. Yes, it's about personalized care, not just the treatment. You can certainly provide personalized care to an individual without giving them precision medicine. There's ways to personalize care, many different aspects of that go far beyond the medicine. But you really have to build a system around personalized care, person-centered outcomes, and personalized decision-making and planning. And those are the ways that you bring out the patient voice and elevate the voice of the patient. If you go to the next slide, this is a crude heuristic, and we actually have mapped this out into a pretty complicated clinical workflow, breaking down these elements into different parts. But I don't have time to present that to you, so I'm just going to shorthand it here. When we think about those aspects of person-centered care, you have to think about what are the modalities. How are you going to break that up into delivery models so you can actually build an explicit structure for standardizing and consistently delivering the opportunity for the patient voice to be elevated and for what matters to the patient to be heard and their caregiver in various aspects of the clinical process. So we think about shared decision-making, care planning, and measurement. And those are the three basic elements or key places that in the supply chain, if you will, that we feel like the patient voice can be brought to bear. And the little feedback loops here are really about the data, data collection, sharing that tracks adherence and progress, patient reporting about quality of life, functional status, health status. And the slide I'll close with is a little bit of a sense of what we mean by patient-reported outcomes. Next slide. So just to break one of those elements down a little bit further to sort of give you a better sense of what we're talking about. If you think about shared decision making, which is I think a term that's pretty familiar across the globe, there's a lot of times we focus on the treatment aspect of that and the precision medicine of that, and that really elevates the expertise of the clinician, which is important. So if you look at the right bubble here, that's sort of the clinician voice, if you will, the evidence regarding benefits, risks, and costs, the medical expertise. If you turn to go back one more. If you turn to the left, though, on the slide, I hope it's your left, the patient and caregiver expertise, that's the voice of the patient. That's the expertise they naturally bring. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we establish health literacy around the science and the clinical knowledge, but really the patients bring already to the table the expertise about themselves and what matters to them. And that's the essence of the patient voice that we really need to match up with the clinical evidence to making sure we're getting the right decision for the right patient at the right time. And then this is my last slide, I believe, if you go to the next one. Got a delay. There we go. And so when we think about the data, when you think about how to measure success and because that's quality measurement and feedback loops are really important to a system that's built around the patient voice and really delivering outcomes that matter to patients. It is precisely that. We have to think about outcomes that really reflect things that matter to patient. And to do that, you have to spend time learning from the patient what's important to them. And even when you're thinking about how you measure success, aligning at least to some degree those measures of success with those things that the patient says are important to them and their goals of care. And that means thinking beyond just traditional clinical outcomes or standardized measures of quality of life. Some of the outcomes need to be personalized to at least the unique attributes of the disease, but certainly in the treatment being used, but also the unique attributes of things that matter to patients. And for us, we've learned that those are things like work disruption, transportation burden, caregiver burden, and financial distress. So with that, I'll turn it over to my other colleagues, and I think I'm right at my 12 minutes. So thank you very much, and sorry to speak quickly.
No, Alan, that was wonderful. And I would ask all our audience today, we have many leaders from the patient advocacy and engagement movement, both on the policy side, on the industry side, on the communication side, to actually listen to what Alan has just shared and the other presentations as not separate conversations, but actually building blocks. I think you're going to find that each piece connects to the other. And I want to acknowledge Levi for the selection of the panel, because they're representative of different segments of the conversation that actually, when these experts are working, they're thinking of one another. So with that, we turn to Alan D. from Cedars Sinai. I want to thank you. You're the first patient engagement officer of this great academic institution. So welcome. And Alan B., I want to thank you very much, because your organization, a national organization, is in the forefront of not only analyzing these access to care issues. You're a national advocacy organization bringing to light your experience and your research so that ideally the system will change. Alan D., over to you.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. Good morning from Los Angeles. I know it's evening for many of you. Boker Tov, Shalom. Thank you very much for having me here today. So, when we had our prep call a week ago, I'll start by saying that you can always tell how engaged the panelists are going to be. This is a fantastic group. And what I really like about the different voices we have, Alan B. and I did not plan this, but I think you teed me up perfectly to talk about, why the patient voice is so important with inside a healthcare system. So that's my role here today. I want to walk you through a little bit about what is a patient experience program and what do we do. I'd love to leave you with the thoughts of how we capture that voice, both through formal and informal processes, and how we use it to truly drive change within a healthcare system. So again, I'm Alan Dubovsky. I've been at Cedars just over 4 years. I'm going to fly through these first couple of slides because we all have the standard ones of who we are, but we are a large academic medical center out in Los Angeles, closing in on 900 beds. We've been around for over 100 years. LA is an interesting market with many, many academic medical centers playing a role here. But Cedars, faith-based and the Jewish religion, has been a sort of cornerstone of the LA community for a very long time. And so some of the things you see on here include all the community benefit we do. We're coming up on about $1 billion in community benefit. One of the largest volunteer programs in the country, one of the busiest EDs in the LA area. So we keep ourselves nice and busy. The next slide again is the standard bragging about ourselves kind of slide. But I do want to share with you that, I think the segue from clinical quality to patient experience is important. As our hospital and health system has focused on what you see here, with driving improvements in clinical quality, having ranked ourselves now at number 7 nationally in the US News and World Report rankings. All of the patient experience indicators have gone up as well. And I think that's an important point to note. We have been very conscientious about, the patient voice being exceptionally important in helping to improve clinical outcomes. And I think we've been able to prove that as one goes up, so does the other. So just keep that in mind as we go through the rest. But next slide, please, Levi. For today, I just, again, wanted to share with you a little bit about the concept of building an office of patient experience and what that looks like. Gil reminded me of this last week on our prep call. Not everyone knows what a patient experience officer is and what we do and how we function. So if you rewind 5 years ago, Cedars Sinai was in the same position. No formal patient experience approach. We had, disjointed surveys happening all over the place. And there really was not one central place where people were gathering, looking at, understanding, and interpreting patient feedback. So I joined in 2016. I've been very fortunate to be able to help build the program. And really, without walking you through everything on here, goal number 1 was to help this hospital understand what is the patient experience and why is it important and why do we want to focus on it. Alan B. touched on so many of these points, but the links to clinical outcomes is just one. There's financial implications, there's patient loyalty and marketing implications. And so once we did that and built our infrastructure around that, obviously a big part of it was completely redesigning our patient voice and survey process, which I'll get to in a second. And then finally, now we're in our maturity phase in year 5 of really helping the organization focus on skill building and improvement for patient experience. So helping frontline employees and team workers, physicians, clinicians, with how do patients want to be engaged with, and this concept of person-centered care, you'll hear a lot today, is the one that we lead with more than anything. Next slide, please. So to give you a sense again of what my team and I do, on the left is our general mission, but on the right is the way I oversimplify the 2 big functions that we serve within this large academic medical center. Number 1, we gather, interpret, report, and analyze all of the patient feedback. So when I walk into a faculty meeting or a nursing huddle, or quite frankly, when I just sort of walk around and talk about our program, I say that anytime you want to know what patients are saying or feeling or thinking, let us help you. There's an art and a science behind gathering that information. And so my team is responsible for taking at this point over 300,000 surveys a year and distilling that down to useful information at a unit or individual level. And then the second thing is coordinating all of that improvement effort that goes along with that. So the things that patients love about us, how do we keep doing that? And then each year, the top 5 or 10 things that we believe to be sort of primary drivers of patient experience, projects and improvement work. My team is responsible for project managing all of that. Next slide, please. I did want to give you a sense of how we capture the patient voice, because I think for the panel today, this is an important one. So, when you step back and think about how do you listen to each individual patient, and that's critically important. Everybody has an individual story, but you also balance that. It's a fine art with not, changing a 900-bed medical center's approach and strategy just because of one issue or one, hiccup along the way. So how do you aggregate it enough while still dealing with the day-to-day complaints? This is our general approach. So on the left, we obviously have a very formal process for capturing a lot of patient feedback. As I mentioned, we're well over 300,000 surveys a year. We're pretty much 99.9% in real time. So within a day of discharge, patients are filling out surveys. We have very high engagement rates with our surveys as well. And then lately, we've been spending a lot of time building really intelligent platforms to help our physicians and clinicians understand, again, what does 92% mean, or what does the 80th percentile mean? Not very much. But here are the 2 things that you need to work on to improve. On the far right, I'll come back to the middle column, but on the far right, we have spent a lot of time working on verbatim feedback. I'm a big proponent of surveys, and I do think the quantitative piece is helpful. But to me, nothing is more important than just having patients tell you exactly how they feel. And so it's not a response to a metric question or having to rate you a 5 out of 5. It's truly like, tell us one thing we could do differently. And so we were one of the first healthcare organizations to go live with an AI platform around capturing verbatim feedback and really using it to drive change. With that said, again, surveys are critically important, but the middle piece to me is, I think, the one that we're most proud of. We really have tried very hard to engage our patient and family advisors. And this is a pretty standard program most hospitals have in the US for sure. So a few of the ways we do that, we have an online patient panel that, in fact, I put this 5,000 number down last week. It's now over 6,000. So it's essentially an online focus group. Anytime we want to do something, a quick example is, as we want to redo the building, put in new technology, redesign check-in processes, we'll send out a survey to this panel and they'll guide us as to what patients and families really want. Very often that has actually changed what we believed was the right thing to do. We have patients on multiple committees, things you wouldn't really think about, but it's been important to have a patient at the IT table, the finance table, facilities design, and things like that. The next slide just gives you a couple of comments from some of our patient and family advisors who these are available on our website too. But I just wanted to make this very real for you. What this comes down to is, a mom sitting at the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit council, and talking about her experience and her baby's experience and what that means, and really helping us make sure that we capture that along the way. Brandy on the right is actually one of our patient experience committee members. And really, again, raises her hand in the middle of the meeting and is the first one to call us out on stuff we should or should not be doing. And that's such a critical voice at the table for us. Next slide, please. I wanted to leave you with just an idea of where we go next. So again, if you step back and think about, we're now in our 5th year of this program. I think we've built a lot of organizational excitement and enthusiasm around patient experience. For me, the most important thing was just being the voice of the patient within this hospital. We've got people dedicated to operations, finance, pharmacy, case management, et cetera. My job, I view it as my job to come to them as often as I can and say, is this what the patient truly wants and their caregiver? And so now we're sort of embarking on the next evolution of patient feedback. And for us, that is really completely redesigning all of our surveys. It sounds very unglamorous, but it's actually a pretty fun project. And so what we're trying to do is figure out, as it stands today, 200 patients are going to be discharged from this medical center. They're all going to get the same survey. A new mom, stage 4 cancer patient, heart transplant patient. What I'm trying to figure out is clearly, somebody who's never been to a hospital versus somebody who has been here, somebody who had a planned admission versus elsewhere, what you're here for. How do we figure out which questions to ask which patients at the right time? So we're using a platform called FeeTrail to really help understand patient expectation in this segmented kind of way. So we're very excited about some of the early data that we have. which we'd be happy to share once it's together. But I think, to me, this is the future of patient feedback and how we think about truly capturing the patient voice in a way that they want to share with us, as opposed to the sort of standard way we've been doing it for a long time. So much like Alan B, I know that was a lot in a short amount of time. I think the next slide has my contact information. I'm always happy to connect with anyone. It's on there, so is our website. So please reach out at any point. Looking forward to your questions later. But with that, I'll turn it back to Gil and Levi. Thank you.
Alan, thank you so much. And Alan, thank you so much. And I think, Alan, you're correct. I think Alan B's presentation really is a great kickoff, and you sort of set the tone for where people meet care. I think this becomes very, very critical. You know, it's navigating a system during stress, and I don't think anybody in society is schooled, whether it be at any point of their educational process, about, you know, when we're a patient, when we're a person who also has a health concern, all of a sudden we're interacting with a system around, as Alan B would talk to, about, you know, how do we deal with payers and how do we get them to actually cover the care that's offered at Cedars Sinai. And once you're inside Cedars Sinai, how do you even navigate the hallways of a great institution like that? It becomes a tremendous point of anxiety and concern that actually influences your state of well-being. We're actually set up now at a perfect moment to hear from Stacy Hurt. And Stacy, while she is a noted patient consultant and himss influencer, for those of you who are not familiar with himss is really the premier health innovation and technology forum. Generally, it attracts tens of thousands of people. It meets in Florida every year. Obviously, this year it did not. Had it been meeting, Stacy would have been one of the key features or figures on the floor of himss, meeting with thousands of people, offering her counsel and advice. I'm not going to share or steal Stacy's thunder. It's quite a magnificent story. I will say that Stacy has a unique superpower. She has patience, she has perseverance, and she has compassion for other people in a way that she's able to share her expertise and elevate the care experience, both for the health provider and for the community of patients she serves. Stacy, over to you.
Gil, thank you for that. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I hear you clearly. Thank you.
Gil, thank you for that introduction. That was completely humbling, and thank you so much. So on our esteemed panel, I am the panelist who self-identifies as a patient and the patient voice. So I'm very honored to embrace that role with you today. And I always begin my presentations with gratitude and empathy. So thank you for joining us today. The empathy portion of this is, see if I can do this, Toda Rabah. I don't know if I pulled that off, but
you did. You pulled it off quite nicely. Very good.
It came from the heart. So thank you so much. So Gil gave me such a graceful introduction. A friend of mine, I love sports and I love sports analogies. And a friend of mine recently coined me as what she called the healthcare triple threat. And I really embrace that. And by that, I mean that I am a patient, in that I am a stage 4 colorectal cancer survivor, and I just hit 5 years cancer-free in October. So I'm very grateful and blessed. I am a caregiver. I have a severely intellectually and developmentally disabled son who doesn't walk, talk, or function for himself in any way. I am his primary caregiver. And that is a very old picture of blonde Stacy. I am a healthcare executive, in that I have worked in the industry for 20 years in areas such as physician practice management, sales, training, operations, IT. So that's my secret sauce, in the fact that a lot of people are just patients, a lot of people are caregivers, people work in the industry like, again, my colleagues today, but I do all three. So I am the patient experience. I am living it, breathing it, walking it every single day. So also part of my healthcare triple threat is the work that I do now. And that is, I do a lot of volunteer patient advocacy. This is my friend Jim, who sadly passed away from colon cancer in 2019. And I do speaking and consulting. So the speaking and consulting work that I do is for pharma, biotech, technology companies who wish to better connect their employees to their purpose, and also to their end user, who's the patient. So if you need a kick-ass talk for your employees that's going to remind them why they do what they do every day, I am your girl. That is what I do. And like I said, having worked in healthcare, it really brings all the pieces together. Plus, I get to do cool stuff like, as Gil said, be a digital influencer for himss and be on a marquee in Times Square. And also, I just was invited to the Telemed Now Thought Group. We do have a bi-weekly tweet chat under the hashtag Telemed Now. If you are a believer, a user of telehealth, we invite you to please join us. Our next one is on the 17th, and I am the patient representative in that group. So COVID-19, as we know, turned healthcare upside down. Yes, you're seeing your screen correctly. And we know that these are our 4 stakeholder groups. We know that it stressed them to the absolute max. So for patients, I want to show this slide first. You've probably all heard of Startup Health, the VC investment firm. The 2019 year-end report and 2020, the investments looked very similar in that the biggest investment was in patient empowerment and the least investment was in education. So what's concerning about that is it highlights the huge gap in health literacy that we face, in that we have all these tools for patients, but they don't know how to use them. So like I said, that's something that we need to work together on. Employees, as we know, had to completely pivot and shift and change their mindsets to adapt throughout COVID. We know all about the burnout for our frontline employees. And then finally, for health systems, we know at one point screenings and elective procedures were down 90%. So that almost bankrupted a few health systems. So these were all the bad parts of COVID-19. If anything good at all came out of COVID-19, it was the leveling of the playing field that occurred across these stakeholder groups and the amplification of the patient voice that came through. Because previously, patients who felt marginalized and who felt like they weren't part of the conversation suddenly were empowered through a lot of virtual means, work from home and everything that we had to use virtually. And we finally felt like our presence was felt and our needs were known. So the patient voice came through loud and clear. So digital health swooped in to save the day with a lot of new shiny tech ideas, the best of which I am biased towards is telemedicine. And finally, years of objections, and we can't do that for years and years, magically melted away in a few months. So the whole time that I, as a caregiver, was saying, wow, it would be really great if I didn't have to lift my son into his wheelchair, into the van, into the doctor's office, where he's also immunosuppressed, is exposed to all of these germs. It would be nice if I could do this telehealth. And everybody previously for 15 years said no, now said yes. And all the times that I was a cancer patient in bed, sick from chemo, and said, I'd like to just do this via telemedicine. And they said, no, finally, we can. So that was wonderful. However, digital health came in with wearables and remote patient monitoring and artificial intelligence for decision support systems, but yet if you can't afford broadband access to access your patient portal that your health system requires you to use to get your test results, but yet they won't help you pay your cable bill, that hardly seems fair. And again, exposes really the social determinants of health that we need to close the gap on. Here's another concern I want to highlight. This shows that roughly a third of Americans do not have a PCP. So it's what I call do-it-yourself healthcare. And we know that that number grows disproportionately among younger people. We also know that 65% of Americans use Dr. Google to diagnose themselves before even seeing a doctor. So this all equates to a fragmented, very cynical, portable patient base who, if we are dissatisfied with our patient experience, we're not afraid to look for another one or do it ourselves. And a lot of people ask me on webinars and in my work, what do you think primary care will look like in the future? And I tell them it will look like this. That is my smartphone. That is where the PCP is going to be, on demand, on your smartphone. It's where we're going. We're getting closer every single day. Both of my colleagues, Alan and Alan, have talked about person-centered care. You see a person in the center of all of this. But it's definitely a shift away from revenue-based care to value-based care. And we as patients need to perceive value in what you're asking us to do. You need to convince us that it's better than what we're already doing. And I can tell you, for one, from a personal experience, we are miles away from two things on this screen: interoperability and democratized data. And I can tell you that from a story from May. I had a PET scan and we had a scare about a possible recurrence of my cancer. And so something lit up and I had to go to my gynecologist, my oncologist, my GI, and my surgeon to look at the images. And literally, when I got to the gynecologist, they had asked me if I had faxed my radiology report. I said, no, I don't do that. I'm not doing that. That's not my job. I'm the patient. And then my oncologist had to burn images to a disk and mail them to my surgeon. Okay, no, we're in 2021. We should all be looking at those images digitally, real time, together with shared decision making. So as you see, that was just May of 2020. We are miles and miles away. So as you're designing, as you're implementing, you need to have a person in mind, probably somebody that doesn't look like you at all, for person-centered care, someone who inspires you so that you can design your tools for them. Okay, time for another story. There I am. That's me going for one of my 20-some PET scans. Yes, I stopped counting. But I had a client 2 years ago that wanted a brochure for clinical trial recruitment. And the idea was, for this clinical trial, they had to get patients that were post-colonoscopy who were diagnosed with cancer, but pre-treatment. So it was a very narrow window to capture this patient to enroll in the clinical trial. And we were trying to figure out a way to do this that was, tasteful. And they said, oh, well, they get the diagnosis, you give them the brochure for the trial. I said, so I'm on this call with all C-suite executives of this biotech company. And I said, if you would have woken me up from my colonoscopy, told me I had cancer, and handed me a brochure to enroll in a trial, I would have punched you. And there was silence on the line. And I was pretty sure I was fired from my job. I was pretty sure I was fired. So I asked another question. And I said, have any of you had cancer? Have any of you had colorectal cancer? Have any of you heard the words, you have cancer? They didn't. So my point with that is, You can't capture the patient voice unless you are the patient voice, unless you have walked in those shoes, heard those words, been on that table experiencing scanxiety. And if you don't know what that is, email me. You don't know the patient voice. So you've probably heard the term follow the money. Well, we're going to shake that up a little bit, and we're going to adjust our perspective to say that the path that leads and ends with the patient will yield the greatest profits. It's no longer follow the money. It's the path that leads and ends with the patient to yield the greatest profits. And if you haven't thought of a patient as a consumer before, it's time to start. Because not only will patients want to have a voice, but we will want to have a choice. So in summary, I want to talk about solution-oriented technology. Figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve and build from there up, and include the patient voice every step of the way with what you're doing. Second, if you are in a position where you are mining data from patients, we deserve to know where it's going and what you're using it for. Anything less than that is an ethical disservice to us as patients. Third, as things do open up from COVID-19, please keep a virtual option open for dialogue for people like me. I'm a full-time caregiver. I can't be traveling to conferences and panels in Florida and Las Vegas and here and there. Even when things open up, I will still be connecting virtually. So make sure that that platform remains. And also, patients are constrained by financial barriers or their own illness, and they want to connect virtually. And last, if you are developing clinical trials or new cancer treatment centers, I just saw a quote from somebody, I'm not going to say who it was. He might be one of my physicians. He's designing a new cancer treatment center. And he said, you know, I really thought about what the patient wanted, and I really considered what the patient needed. No. Call me up. You have my number. Don't consider us, consult us. So thank you, and I look forward to our panel discussion and your questions. Thank you.
Stacy, thank you so much for the trifecta of experience. I think it's so important, and there's some key takeaways here. I just want to remind our audience today, you know, Stacy talked about the fragmentation of the U.S. health system. You see, Levi had a consult from his daughter just now, by the way, and that's where he doesn't confess this publicly, but I know he gets all of his best advice from his daughter. I think, was she 9 now at this point, Levi? He's not 9. I'm close. So that's.
She'll be back. Don't worry. You'll get.
She'll be back, of course. Yes. Don't threaten us, but we look forward to seeing her. But you know, Stacy talked about the fragmentation of the system. She talked the difference between, I'm going to say, the consumerism of the system as opposed to the customer in the system. These are actually very critical concepts. Hey, sweetie, how are you? Very critical concepts that actually inventors, for those of you who are on the invention side of health, we often don't think of. I just want to make one important note, looking at Stacy's slides very, very closely. Christina, you can breathe a sigh of relief. That was a Siemens MRI that Stacy was going inside of. So
I didn't even notice that. Branding.
There was no commercial ties between Stacy and Christina and Siemens. I want to assure everybody that this presentation is all on the up and up. We're being very, very ecumenical here. But I think Krista will probably take a break to reach out to her CEO just to say, we just had a national endorsement from one of the key patient consultants in the world on screen at a global webinar on the patient voice. Good work to both of you. Thank you. We're going to move over to this. You see the progression. We start with the challenges that the patient face. Ultimately, it's all about access to care. If people don't have access to care, as Alan B pointed up, what good is all this innovation and ideas if people who have the most needs can't get what you're doing? Then Alan Dubovsky talked really about the fact that it's an experience. Saving your life or sustaining your health is an experience, and that at Cedars Sinai, they're starting to look at this as terms of the patient, not as a patient, but as a person who's also a customer of the system. And just like when you go to a store, you get a survey often after you complete a purchase. How do you track with that experience and measure it and respect it? Stacy came in and said, look, even from the standpoint of a health expert, I was in the system. I was doing what Alan B. talks about. I was looking at making sure doctors got paid, patients got reimbursed, innovators received money from the health system. I was pivotal to all that. And suddenly I'm thrust in as sort of like the glue that holds this system together, not willingly, but to survive, I've got to navigate this fragmented system and learn it at a higher level. Now we're going to shift over to Jessica Scott of Takeda, and we're going to hear about her experience, which is very unique. First of all, I just want to say that Jessica is a physician. She's an attorney. She's taken on a very critical role for the company as a person who has really stepped forward as being responsible for patient engagement at the fundamental stage, research and development. So while Alan and Stacy are talking about the experience of dealing with the system in terms of accessing the care, Jessica is going to start talking a bit about the discovery of care itself. As we're looking at the development of drugs from the bench to the clinic, how do we bring in the voice of the patient and make them part of the next wave of innovation? Jessica, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's amazing the build here on the panelists and the stories that we're each telling about what we do. Thank you to Oz here behind the curtain for thinking about how these building blocks really contribute to the full impact of this discussion. So my story about the patient voice or patient engagement really starts from well before I even knew what it was. My sister developed osteosarcoma. I was 13 when she was diagnosed. She had dark hair and brown eyes, very much like my mother. And I had blonde hair and blue eyes, as I do now. They called us chocolate and vanilla for obvious reasons. My parents took her to the best medical centers in New York City. These are like the Cedars Sinai's, and enrolled her in multiple clinical trials. They both struggled to keep down their teaching jobs. One of them needed to take her in for clinical trials 5 days a week. 90 minutes of driving each way, 5 days a week. Fortunately, my mother was able to negotiate some flexibility in her work schedule, which meant that she, on off days when she would not be taking my sister for treatments, she would be teaching health and phys ed in the Bronx, and keeping her job down, coming home, cooking those hot cooked meals that mothers did back in the 70s. And 80s, and then looking up all she could about osteosarcoma at night to be the best advocate that she could be for my sister. My parents were exhausted and stressed. And the study team that in the clinical trials, they treated my sister, but rarely asked my sister or my mother or any of us how we were doing beyond the required few questions. They didn't really know much about my sister, her life, for example, that she was an avid tennis player and that she played for the high school tennis team. That, really she had to accept the decisions that the team made. This was long before shared decision-making. She had to accept that she needed a knee replacement and that tennis had ended for her forever. She felt like a number. She felt like an osteosarcoma rather than a whole person. And she was always a bit of a rebel, and she was being stripped of everything that defined her as a person. She really rebelled against her medical treatment, some defiance really, or just a morsel of control during what may have felt like a losing battle to her. The treatments caused her days and nights of vomiting and hair loss, and she wanted to really spend time with her boyfriend. And I remember some intense arguments where my parents were really begging her to continue with her treatments. Her cancer spread and she failed the trials in New York. And by this time, the stress on my family became very intense and my parents separated. My mother was very desperate and she found a trial in Philadelphia, and she took my sister 1 week out of every 3 to a trial in Philadelphia, and I stayed home to remain focused on high school. Not easy. In this photo on the right, I'm 16, and I grew up quickly. I had to graduate from high school just soon after my sister passed away. I went to college and then medical school, and what I really wanted to do was take care of people and whole families. And the biopsychosocial model of family medicine really appealed to me. My sister didn't survive, but what I took away was a real passion for truly partnering with patients and taking care of whole families. In the clinical trial arena, I feel had my sister's doctors truly partnered with her, it would have really encouraged her to participate in her own care. What I hear from patients again and again is that there's nothing like feeling supported from a team of professionals who have your back, who look out for your needs, who are willing to fight while you're fighting for your life, and who were there also to support your care partners. So for pharma and technology companies, I believe we've got an opportunity to collaborate and work together to support patients, and that's why I'm here today. I'm inspired to bring my passion for helping patients as whole people and their families through collaborations as partners in the development of medicines and advancements in healthcare. And from what I'm seeing, we have an opportunity to do things very differently. Give me 1 second here as my slides advance. Okay. This is what I'm calling Patient Engagement 2021. And it's about designing trials that patients will want to participate in and stay in. It's about understanding which symptoms matter most to them and understanding what evidence they'll need to see and have to make decisions with their healthcare providers should those medicines become approved. Our patient engagement office at Takeda is here, and we've developed a process that helps us bridge the patient and the patient's advisors with our internal Takeda teams and also our vendor partners, the technology companies and CROs that we work closely with, to gain those unique insights and that only patients living with the experience, as we heard from Stacy, are able to share with us, so that we can truly partner in developing medicines that will transform their lives. I'm excited to share this with you because I believe that patient engagement will give us and all of you that competitive edge, and more importantly, that it will help us truly meet the needs of the patients that we serve. What I'm suggesting is a new kind of patient engagement. Patient engagement uncovers unique insights to create technology and healthcare services that truly matter to patients and that pharma can use and that we can use collaboratively in a new way. And I'm going to talk more about that. Let's take a look at how we can do this. So we'll focus first for a few minutes on patient insights to support the success of advancing medical products and health services, and particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. And then taking it to the next level, by working together, we can reduce the fragmentation that Stacy described so well in healthcare and in the pharmaceutical clinical trial enterprise to really enhance the richness of our collaborative thinking and what we do together to enhance patient care. Let's take a look at some examples of both of these. The key point in bringing insights through patient engagement into what we do in the pharmaceutical industry is to understand firsthand what the patient experience is through their lens, rather than what we traditionally do, which is understanding through the lens of the physician. It's blurry at best to get it secondhand through the physician. As a physician, I can tell you, we never really got it quite accurately. And the questions that we need to ask patients in the pharmaceutical industry is more specific to drug development. So we need to go directly to patients to get those insights. And let me give you an example here. This is different than what we might learn through consumer focus group testing. We had a technology partner that was looking to share an adherence app for use in a Parkinson's disease clinical trial. And they tested the use of the app for adherence with a Parkinson's disease with a tremor, and were very confident that it would work. Well, the tremor wasn't the issue. When we tested it in this focus group or this advisory board with patients, what we found it was the fine motor skills and coordination, as well as the cognitive dysfunction that prevented the app from really working in this patient group. And we weren't able to use the app ultimately in the trial. And so for us, it was preventing the wasted resources in using that app and really looking for an app that would be usable in this patient population for the trial. And so the technology companies that we work with can ultimately work together with us in a whole new way to collaborate not only with us, but one another to bring a new platform, particularly with COVID-19, as we look to decentralized trials in a pre-competitive way where we're looking to meet the needs of patients where they are now with thinking about what patients need and starting with their needs first. I really like the way Alan talked about this from the get-go of our conversation today. By addressing where they are and their needs, we can start with that as the central point and develop collaboratively what we can do to meet those needs in the clinical trial, virtualized clinical trials, given that we're at COVID and probably not going to go back to the way things were. This is something that we needed to address as Takeda. So I'm going to share with you from the words of my colleague internally, Patrick Tierney, who speaks as quickly as my dear esteemed panelist, Alan D, so that I can get in as many words per minute as he does, maybe, and say a few other things about how effective this pre-competitive collaboration of technology partners, external technology partners, was with co-creating with patients. Here's something I'd like to share with you for just a minute or so.
Oops, sound, please. Jessica, do you want to go back and put the sound on?
Oh, sorry, do you not hear that sound? Okay.
No. But thank you. Thank you. I want to make sure that everybody hears it.
Yes, please.
Or he's speaking so fast, actually, that you need super.
You just didn't even hear it. Okay.
That happens at times. There we go.
The challenge we were faced with was how do we adopt digital tools in clinical trials in a patient-centric manner? And this is an important one because this is a challenge that all pharma companies are struggling to solve for. We were fortunate to have 5 advisors from the Patient Engagement's Office Standing Council. These are individuals who either directly participated in a clinical trial or were caregivers to individuals who participated. So they had hands-on direct experience with what it's like to be in a clinical trial. I think it's really important to highlight how unique of an approach this was, not just for Takeda, but for the pharma industry as a whole. We brought 11 different suppliers together to discuss these issues, many of them direct competitors of each other. And then layered on top of all of that, we had these 5 patient advisors who could systematically weigh in on every topic of discussion, whether this was something worthwhile pursuing to discuss further, or actually we had it completely wrong and we were going down a rabbit hole that wasn't relevant or important to them. So the format of the workshop was an initial brainstorming where we generated 200 plus ideas. And a key contribution of the patient advisors was how do we distill down those 200 plus ideas into opportunities that were important for solving the problem of reducing patient burden. And so their continuous feedback and their willingness to weigh in every step of the way and share their thoughts, opinions, and experience was critical in helping us distill down those 200 plus ideas into 12 actionable opportunities that we then prioritized for implementation. The big difference here is we started off with what is important to patients. Our starting point was the patient perspective.
So my colleague Patrick Tierney came to me to collaborate on and to be that bridge, to bring patients to the table for that discussion. It was really a very productive conversation where we were able to bring those unique insights to the discussion, and it was very, very productive. We're moving forward with many of those insights. So in summary, I'm suggesting that we bring insights in to the technology that we develop, the services, which is echoing the points that my colleagues have raised in the discussion already, and that we even bring it to the next level, where in a pre-competitive way, we work together to think about those insights and really defragment the technology and health services that we deliver so that the patient experience, like Stacy brought up, is more connected. And Alan, I hope that this doesn't work you out of your job where you don't have to have the personalized navigation, but I don't think that will go away. But we really do need to help the patient get through these processes in a way that works for them. So I look forward to further discussion. I ask that you should listen to patients and work closely with the pharma and other tech partners to develop new products in healthcare.
Jessica, thank you so very much for this and your insights as really being an ambassador within Takeda to the outside world on the discovery and development end. You know, I don't think that R&D is going to be out of a job, because ultimately it's going to be about individuals' experience to care. And as Stacy mentioned, care is institutional. And as Alan B mentioned, once we start to interact with the system, there's always going to be challenge that needs to be engaged. We're going to switch over now to Christina. Christina is based in Germany. She is the lead for patient engagement for a global company. Siemens Healthineers is really a giant. And I think that we'll find that if we start to piece together each of you, a lot of the journey, as Stacy mentioned quite bluntly and importantly, which is, you know, how dare someone be asked about, you know, right after they've gotten a diagnosis, hey, do you want to go into this trial? You know, that whole sense of what's your experience as a person. We use that word patient often, and it's called the voice of the patient. But actually, we have to remember, patients are people, and people have experience. I know that Siemens Healthineers is very much looking at people experience in terms of the design of innovation that can improve people's journey through the system. It starts with diagnostic information. There's a concern. How do we explore that concern? Understand what's involved. Understand what medical professionals to engage. It is at the beginning of the journey. Christina, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Gil, and thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure to be here today. And actually, I mean, what a great set of fellow panelists here. They said everything, but I'm just going to put a little bit of our flavor in there. So again, thanks very much. So actually, you know, I just want to share that often I find myself in conversations where people are asking me, you know, what I'm working on or who I'm working for. And it's indeed the case that when I mention Siemens Healthineers, the first thing that comes to people's mind is technology and innovation. Next slide, please. And engineering, so which is actually a great icebreaker when you start a conversation with a physicist like myself. So when a few years back, we started developing our strategies to increase the value in healthcare, we utilize what we're very familiar with, innovation. Next slide, please. And we translate it into a domain that we were not so known for, the patient experience. And our innovation was to establish the first company-wide patient experience initiative with a goal to infuse a joint vision and culture that permeated throughout the organization and integrated a patient-centric, value-based mindset. And here, together with precision medicine, transforming care delivery, and digitalizing healthcare, we have the strategies that are the cornerstones to our journey in shaping the future of healthcare. Next slide, please. But why, if we were to start, let's say with the why we chose this path and we took this initiative? Well, in the recent years, we have seen that the voice of the patients is becoming increasingly important, and that is getting more and more apparent that patients becoming informed consumers. So in fact, research have shown that actually 76% of patients consider the reputation of the healthcare system being very important. Then we have the digital natives, the Netflix and the Amazon generations, that they prefer a personalized experience. The millennials want immediate and convenient access everywhere. And then the patients increasingly paying out of pocket expenses. So it's not really about someone else's money anymore. And it has become rather clear that healthcare systems need to react in all of those by setting a priority in improving patient experience. And even more now, in the current era of the pandemic, we saw that patient trust, engagement, as well as the experience of care has been highly affected. Next slide, please. So the core of our innovation was how to improve the patient experience. And what we mean by that is that we are improving the sum of all interactions that influence the patient perception across the continuum of care. And here we see what this means actually. The continuum of care starts with engaging the people before they become patients. It continues with a diagnostic and therapeutic experience in a care setting, and actually finishes or concludes that with a loyalty to the health system, which creates an excellent patient experience. If I start a little bit, I'm going to go into the details here because I find it very interesting how we go through this pathway. So at the beginning, we're looking at how we should engage patients and people before they become patients, by creating cohorts of individuals at risk and by proactively promoting good health. We can anticipate the risk of the disease, or the onset of a disease can be avoided. And when we have this large scale outreach and we provide education to patients and families, we support them to be active in their care, to have the voice and make the informed choices. Next slide, please. So if we move now to the next stage along the continuum of care, we look at the diagnostic experience. And here we have three core factors that influence the quality of the patient experience. We have the processes, the technology, and also the interactions with the healthcare staff. So once the patients get into the hospital, they anticipate a quick diagnosis and a convenient and timely access to the appropriate test results. And the healthcare providers, in order to answer to these expectations, they should provide diagnostic services with patient-friendly technology where and when the patients need them. And an additional very important factor here is during this journey is the interactions between the patients and the healthcare teams. If staff is stressed, tired, or untrained, then this greatly impairs the patient experience. And that's why the physical and the mental health of the healthcare workers is highly relevant. Next slide, please. So following the accurate diagnosis, we are at the treatment stage. And here, what matters to patients are outcomes that typically include complication-free survivals, fewer infections, faster recoveries, and in general, how we can have a better quality life in the long term. And what contributes here is, for example, building trust and engagement with the patients, to understand their illness, to have what are the treatment options, to possible implications we're seeing. Or can we use technology for minimal invasive therapy? Next slide, please. And finally, when we talk about patient loyalty, what we mean here is that the patients return back to the healthcare providers, to those where they develop the relationship, and they continue this relationship that with those providers who can fulfill their needs, and they can enable more active participation in their well-being. So this loyalty is also inspired when continuity of care is guaranteed through integrated care plans and the close connection between the caregivers and the patients. The patient has a voice and the healthcare provider listens to it. And to sustain this loyalty, actually, it doesn't happen only on one stage or during this continuum. It has to be in all the stages across the pathway. Next slide, please. So within this patient experience framework I just described, we also engaged on a study where we had patients and healthcare providers to identify which actually are the most important influencer factors across the continuum of care. We summarize the results here in a scorecard, and we use that to develop system-wide patient experience efforts, as well as to identify gaps and potential areas that they require improvement in a healthcare organization. And if we look a little bit in detail here, briefly, we have for engaging patients and families, the effective communication is the most important factor. For optimizing diagnostic experience, teamwork plays a fundamental role. For delivering outcomes that matter to patients, it is the coordination of care and pain management and quality and safety practices. And finally, the engagement level of employees is the most important factor for sustaining patient loyalty. Next slide, please. Well, setting up our innovation in this way was before the pandemic. So with the COVID-19 outbreak, we get new challenges. And the healthcare systems have shifted a little bit priorities. However, what we have seen is that the patient experience is more than ever on the focus. So the patients are confronted with new reality, threatened by a virus about which little was known. And the healthcare workers are facing tremendous physical and psychological challenges. The COVID-19 has brought new needs to the hospital infrastructure and accelerated the development of digitalization in terms of telehealth, the remote visits, remote monitoring, and so many others. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example here of how the patient experience pivoted during the last few months. Following the first acute phase of COVID-19, back in April and May, a survey was conducted in the US where it shows that 45% of people would be uncomfortable to seek care in the emergency room. 30% in the hospital, and 37% in walk-in clinics. And the more recent study in UK, it showed that 1 million women missed their vital breast screening as a result of the lockdowns. And these numbers show us that, in fact, the patients are extremely concerned of getting back to the care sites for routine operations or regular treatments. And this is the fear that it was developed in case they get infected. And this might have long-term consequences in their health, as we can see. So if we are to summarize here, next slide, please. The impact of the pandemic had in the patient experience. I would say we learned that patient safety comes first, together with effective and timely communication. Retaining the patient confidence and trust plays a vital role in healthcare, especially in times of crisis and uncertainty. Agility of the healthcare sector is an important factor in adapting during the pandemic. Digitalization in healthcare might reframe the patient experience as we are moving from telehealth to digital patient engagement and data-based decision analytics. And care for the caregivers is key because the physical and the mental health of healthcare workers should be a top priority. We need to protect those who protect others. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in closing, I would like to iterate once more that the patient pathway is not a straight line. And along this path, the voice of the patient is indeed becoming increasingly important. We, as industry and healthcare providers, are here to listen to this voice and to co-create with them together their pathway for the future across the continuum of care. And with that, I would like to thank you very much, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Gil, you're on mute. We can't hear you, Gil. Can you hear us?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you, Levi, and thank you for that. Christina, thank you very much for that. And I appreciate it. The wonderful presentations by all of our panelists. And I wish we could continue this for another hour or so, or a day. It's worthy of a conference. And I want to acknowledge Levi for bringing this together. A lot of information here. It's extremely critical. As Josh is applauding the panel, and that's appreciated. We have many experts also attending this webinar as participants, as attendees. I want to acknowledge all of you. There are people in the audience like Glenna Crooks who really have written the book, so to speak, on listening about patients way back when it was a very radical concept. So that is very, very important. I want to also acknowledge all the questions that have come in on the chat. They're being recorded, they'll be retained, and they'll be shared with our panelists. So just a few housekeeping items as we spend the last 10 minutes in a panel conversation. One, Levi has shared all of our LinkedIn profiles. You're welcome to connect to us on LinkedIn and ask us questions. Also, all of these companies and participants are on Twitter and share pertinent information either by way of their companies or their personal Twitter handles. You're welcome to follow them and stay in touch with them and be part of their conversations as we go forward. That's invaluable. I highly recommend it. Now, I want to ask two questions of our panelists. We're going to give all of our panelists an opportunity to participate in these questions. And I just want to make sure that all of our innovators understand how important this is. Often when I'm traveling the world and I'm speaking to people involved in health innovation, you're passionate about that which you're creating. You're passionate about the idea, the innovation itself. And in fact, the innovation or invention, I'm going to use the word invention, is important. The difference between invention and innovation is something you do, you create from anew. Innovation is when the marketplace feels they want it. If it's not desirable, Christina's nodding and so is Stacy. If it's not desirable, it's a figment of your imagination. It's an invention come to life. It is not innovation. So as you listen to the presentations you've heard, if it doesn't reach Alan D's institution and someone within Cedars Sinai says, we're going to put it in the building, on the formulary, encourage our health professionals to use it, it doesn't succeed. If Alan Bach doesn't have problems trying to advocate to make sure that those people in need can get that care, and it's the care you've invented, it's not important. So you're seeing the connective tissue here. If Stacy's doctor doesn't speak to Stacy about this idea, if Stacy doesn't feel a sense that it's worth her while, it's worth mustering courage to do, then it wasn't important enough to invent in the first place. If Jessica's team is not thinking through at the bench level, at the earliest stages of innovation, invention, we need to incorporate the people who may need this and make sure they feel they need it. If their voice is not heard at that place, it doesn't happen. If the experience is such within the system, and Christina's organization, Siemens Healthineers, has to consider both Alan D's institution and Stacy's experience simultaneously. If that's not happening, it's an idea, it's not innovation. So part of the patient voice, or the voice of the patient, is not a feel nice thing to do. It is about advancing innovation to improve the human condition. When I started in this field quite some years ago, I'm proud to say that I'm still here. I'm older than our panelists. The system felt, both the pharmaceutical company and the diagnostic deliverers and the hospital system felt there was only really one real customer to consider. And that real customer was the physician. The physician made all the decisions. The physician had to desire it, write for it, look at it, and that was sufficient. If the physician said to Alan D's institution, I want it, that was sufficient for the hospital president to say, how many of those do you want, doctor? And that's how the system worked in the 80s and until 1994 in the United States. And in 1994, around the world, in Europe, the United States, and other major nations, we moved the system to all of a sudden, gee, how much does that cost? How valuable is it? But still around the world, it's interestingly enough, when we look at the cost of care, in the United States, it's $3 trillion a year. When we look at the cost of care and we say Alan D's institution is losing money on revenue, we don't look at the cost of care, we still look at the revenue of care. More and more, as others spoke, Stacy mentioned value-based care. Everyone who's a panelist is trying to bring this into alignment. So I'm going to start off with a question, an unexpected question, but I know our panelists are up to the task. I know our audience needs to hear the answer to this question. None of our panelists are payers or regulators. None of our panelists are sitting there determining formulary of what gets used and what doesn't get used. None of our panelists are from EMEA, the regulatory group, or FDA, the regulatory group. So my question to you starts off with, when you look at that environment, you're all impacted by that environment. I'd like to start first with Alan B. and ask you, when you think of the regulator, in your case, Alan, it might be CMS that determines Medicaid and Medicare. It might be a private payer on the payer side, public or private. When you think of the government in dealing with that, what comes to mind? Where are they in the conversation that we've all just had?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gil. I think the common theme, at least in the US, and I think it carries across the globe, is value-based care. So I think all the segments of the healthcare ecosystem are focused on that concept. Now, what that means and what's value, we won't even go down that rabbit hole. But I do think that's the common framework, that there is a conversation happening around consumerism and patient centricity, and how do you use the concept of value-based care to not only drive down the cost curve, but also make sure that there's high quality in the delivery of that care. I think the tension that people are wrestling with, particularly the payers, is they're sort of locked in this concept of standardizing care as a means of supplying an efficiency in the supply chain. What I think you've heard across these presentations is the need to think about a more consumer specific and personalized model that, if you understand economics, actually there's a supply chain around that that can be cost effective. Just as well as efficiency. So there's an adaptive or responsive or personalization in the supply chain that can actually yield cost-effective outcomes. And I think that's the level at which I would hope that payers and regulators are thinking about how to organize their systems and their leverage in the system, because that's ultimately how you create a more consumer, sort of personalization and consumerism in the healthcare system. And it doesn't mean you need personalization everywhere and in all cases. There are times when standardization makes a lot of sense, and there are times when personalization makes more sense. So it's actually a mix of those different supply chain models that's going to get you to value-based care.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. We're going to ask one question of everybody, by the way, and wrap up close to the appointed time. So, Stacy, Alan just sort of pulled a word out of your presentation. Consumerism, personalized care. When you sort of like your heart hit the floor with the diagnosis, all of a sudden you sort of changed the title from person to patient, and you think of the payer involved. None of you really talked about the payer in your presentations. I just have a quick question spinning off of Alan's comment. What was your interaction with payers like as a patient, as a person who understands the payer system?
Well, I have to give two examples. The first one is as a caregiver for Emmett, my IDD son. I'll never forget fighting. He has a one-on-one nurse. She's here today while I'm with you, and because he doesn't do anything for himself. And I remember, asking for nursing services from his medical assistance insurance company. And I had to fight so hard for it that I had to appeal it. And I went downtown Pittsburgh and I sat around a table with, utilization review and this person and that person. And I sat there fighting for Emmett's nursing services. And again, I said to them, I looked at all of them and I said, do any of you have a special needs family member? Do any of you have a special needs son? You are welcome to come spend a day in my house, and I will show you why I need this service for my son. If you don't believe me, if I didn't give you the documentation, come spend a day in my house. Nobody came and it got approved. That's number one. Yeah. Number two, as a cancer patient, when I was initially diagnosed, I had a CT scan of my liver that missed the tumor in my liver. So I was initially diagnosed as a stage 2, and then we had to appeal to get a PET scan, which showed cancer 27 places in my body. So I went from a 2 to a 4. And each subsequent time that I've had a PET scan, we had a fight for it with the insurance company. And my oncologist was like, I can't believe we have to fight and appeal this because a CT scan changed your diagnosis. If we would have gone by that CT scan, I would be dead. Literally, I would be dead.
You were fighting for your life, fighting for your life with your payer.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just, just building on what Alan B said, look at the value. The value is my son's life. The value is my life. And that's what should drive the diagnostics and the tests and the services from the payer.
Thank you for that. It's really important for people to understand it's about human struggle. And Ofra is sending you love, by the way. So That's really critical. You know, I want to flip over to Jessica Scott and then Christina, and then finally to Alan for the wrap up. But you know, Jessica, you've heard from Alan B. the struggle he faces when the problem hits, and Stacy, you're at the development stage of innovating or inventing medicines that can improve the human condition. I just want to get a quick thought from you. On one hand, you're inventing molecules that go into people. On the other hand, you've got to invent molecules that payers, whether it's public or private, are going to say, got it, it's an unmet need, or it's a need, or it's better than. Can you just share with the audience a sense of, like, we're trying to think of Stacy, and we're trying to think downstream of the problem that Alan B is going to face. We're trying to think of our customers at Cedars Sinai.
Yeah, absolutely.
Share with us a sentence or two. What do you have to think about?
Yeah, and part of it is that molecule of the bench, and then part of it's clinical trials in the healthcare setting where we're running clinical trials with study doctors. And what we need to generate through those clinical trials with people, with MRI scans, with the lab results, is the evidence that will ultimately help the patients make healthcare decisions with their doctors. So those are the endpoints that they will need to make those decisions, whether it be, improvement in symptoms, that's a patient-reported outcome, or, improved scan results, et cetera. And we rely on the patient experience to tell us what do they need to be able to make those decisions. And we are advocating with regulators and payers for the trials and the evidence to support the patient decision-making ultimately. And really, FDA has a whole series of patient-focused drug development requirements, legislative mandates that require that they consider now the patient perspective in drug development. So we're very aligned there. And Takeda is actually now leading in we've seeded some money with patient-focused medicines development in Europe to align regulators in the US and the EMA and even in Asia, and also payers to advocate for the patient perspective, that the evidence support the needs and interests of patients in the development process to be able to ultimately answer those questions.
Thank you for that. And I encourage all of our attendees at the webinar today to listen to what Jessica just shared, because you should be aware of those FDA sort of guidelines around patient experience. And is it meaningful for patients? The voice of the patient does matter to the regulator, be assured. You need to factor that in terms of your design work, whether it's a device, a digital health app, which is reviewed by FDA, a medicine, or a diagnostic. Christina, this concept that we talked about, the payer, and what Stacy just talked about, battling to get another diagnostic modality to take a look at the potential of cancer being present in her body. What is Siemens Healthineers doing to make that journey easier for the patient?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Very, interesting to see from that perspective. So, and on one hand, our aim is to bring a high value care in the lower cost. And for that, we have a range of product portfolio to address all the needs globally for a different, from the smallest practice to the biggest hospital chain. And that's one aspect of what we're offering. But when we design our systems, we are going with the patient in our mind. And this is part of our innovation that described earlier on, where we reach out to 53,000 employees and millions of patients. So we do everything for, and I wouldn't say the patient only, I would say for the people, for the human, yeah? And because each one of us is a patient at some day. And what we are doing is we are connecting that when we are designing a system with the patient in mind of how would the patient be more comfortable, or how we can make faster, let's say, procedures, or how we can do remote procedures so that we don't bring the patient, even more pain, discomfort, and increase their anxiety when they go through the diagnostic and therapeutic experience.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, you know, I think we would all agree at the end of the day, when we hopefully far later, but unfortunately sometimes, you know, life is unpredictable. What I think we all have learned, Stacy, I think would reaffirm, we don't control what's happening. We control our response to what is happening. And we have some influence over how we respond. And hopefully the reason I say that Stacy is such an inspiration is that Stacy demonstrates sort of that sitting back and reflecting and drawing upon every element of this fragmented health ecosystem, trying to marshal it for survival. Where does it play out? Where, Christina, does your technology play out? Generally, it's connected to a major medical system like Cedars Sinai. I think Jessica would agree. Where does development play out? Generally through a major medical academic center like a Cedars Sinai. I think Stacy would say when your life is on the line, where you're going to go? Probably to a major medical center like Cedars Sinai. And Alan is going to say when someone is struggling with a bill, they've gotten a letter from a doctor, a hospital system saying you owe. I know that you're on Medicaid, but you know, or you don't have Medi-Cal right now. You've fallen between the cracks, and you have a $250,000 medical bill, and we're going to take whatever you have left. You know, Alan B is trying to deal with that. Ultimately, it's Alan Dubovsky who's sort of working within his system to sort of like get them to say, wait a minute, let's look at this person's life and understand what's going on. So Alan, I want to wrap up with you on this question. Ultimately, you have to build and modernize and create something that is state of the art for all of our survival. You have to bring in the best innovation possible to make that achievable. Your doctors need the best equipment. Your health professionals need the best equipment, and yet you have to sustain the institution. So my question to you as it relates to our audience, when you're looking at innovation that can improve the human condition and people want it, and you're looking at the patient experience and you're part of that big executive conversation at Cedars Sinai, how do you match the cost of the institution, the voice of the patient, and the ability to sustain the institution itself?
Yeah, it's the $1 billion question, Gil. But
yes, it is.
Yeah,
actually, it's a $3 trillion question in the United States.
Yeah, no, it's a fair one, and I think it's an interesting one to end on. So, you know, we have spent a lot of time lately trying to. Innovation keeps flying our way, right? Every day there's a new company, a new product. We even have an accelerator on campus. So we every year bring a cohort of startups into LA and do this for a living. But at the end of the day, what we question back to all of these companies, and what the advice I would give to people on the call today is, yeah, just saying that you believe it's going to improve patient experience isn't enough, right? You know, use cases of where you've done it, truly patient testimonials, people we can talk to. And I don't want to oversimplify, but at the end of the day, when we have now gotten into a practice of when we are about to make a big decision like that, our patient and family advisors have pretty much the final say. We think this is the right clinical technology, you know, information technology, whatever it is it something that will make a difference in your life? If the answer to that question is no, we actually become pretty good about saying, you know what, we're going to pass. It's not something that we need to be taking on. So nothing could be worse than bringing a million different things into a hospital that are not going to make a difference to a patient. And so we really are trying to get into a good cadence of having those questions ready with all of our new innovations on site.
Alan, what a great wrap-up answer to to tie it all together. I want to thank you very much. I want to acknowledge our panelists who have been here, some late at night, some early in the morning. Alan, Stacy, Jessica, Christina, thank you so much for all of your time and energy, your expertise. I also want to thank your enterprises that you're connected to. I really want to thank Alan, you and your organization, the Nation Patient Foundation, for all the great work you're doing, and Alan, Cedars Sinai, Stacy, you're a voice in many different communities. It's appreciated. himss, the Pink Socks movement, and so much more to the telehealth movement. Jessica, thank you, and thank you all to your Takeda colleagues for all the great work they're doing in inventing new medicines that can sustain our lives. Christina, obviously diagnostics are the navigational vehicle of which all decisions are made. So to you and the Siemens Healthineers crew, thank you very much. I want to end with a thank you to Levi Shapiro and the mHealth Israel community. It's a global community. It might be headquartered in Israel. It is changing health all around the world. There's no doubt about that. Levi, you are our ambassador. You're an ambassador for great patient experience and voice, for innovation, and to make sure, obviously, that ideas that are being conceptualized right at this moment have the possibility to change and sustain our lives. Thank you all for joining us today. Levi will be posting this webinar online in a few days. Again, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Toda raba.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Dad's friends.
I don't know who these who all these companies are, but I follow this guy on Twitter. He's actually local in New Jersey. And this woman's the head of patient. It's pretty interesting.
When is that hearing?
Right.
What's the date for that?
The 23rd.
It was the Josh down. And the idea we had was like what I told you and say for next being a large, it's going to be $1 amount. Yeah. So. One to Josh and to Micah to see how far apart they are. Micah's going to be persistent. So at least that a little bit, and we'll hopefully open Micah up pretty close that we